What a goal scored on fullback.
Lawler, number 2.
I've scored a lot of goals for Liverpool Football Club at fullback.
Chris, they used to call him the Ghost. He could turn up anywhere.
Truth revealed. One side shows Chris Lawler speaking to media, the other shows him in a hospital bed, body broken by the game that made him famous. By 2021, a Liverpool legend needed £20,000 for hip surgery and could not pay it. How did it get this bad for the Silent Knight, a player who scored 61 goals from the back, who played 316 games without missing one, ended up needing strangers to help him walk? This is about what football forgot, what it owed, and what one man carried with dignity. And if you want more stories like this, use the hype feature and give this video some hype. It really helps these football history stories reach more people. By May 2021, Chris Lawler was living in constant agony. At 77, the man who once glided across Anfield like a ghost could barely walk. His son Leon wrote something that cut to the bone. "I have genuinely seen him pass out through the pain. 2 hip replacements on the same leg had already failed. Now the other hip was destroying him. COVID lockdowns made it worse. Stuck at home, moving less, the damage deepened. An NHS waiting list stretched for 1 year, 1 full year of suffering while a legendary footballer waited his turn. But unlike most, he could not afford to jump the queue. Private surgery cost £20,000. That was the number. His son had to tell the world the truth. Chris Lawler, a man everyone assumed was wealthy after years at Liverpool, did not have £20,000. Some people may think he is loaded, Leon explained. This is far from the case. This was not a rich man. This was a working man who gave his prime years to a sport and watched that sport walk away. So the family made a decision that broke their hearts. They launched a GoFundMe page. They were asking fans and the Brotherhood of Football to help a legend walk without screaming. The response came fast. The Spirit of Shankly Supporters Union donated £1,000 within hours. Within hours. Money poured in from people who remembered, who still cared, who believed Chris Lawler deserved better. But even with the fans stepping up, there was still a gap. Then something happened that felt like fate, but was really just damning of the entire system. A former Liverpool player reached out. No name, no fanfare, no press conference. An anonymous teammate from the glory days said simply, "I will pay the rest. I will cover the remaining amount." The man who had stood with Lawler in dressing rooms, who had fought battles with him on muddy pitches, remembered who Chris was. Lawler was humbled and delighted. The donor would hold a special place in his heart forever. There it was. A legend got to walk again because of charity, because a brother remembered, not because of a pension or a system that looked after its own, but because one man decided to help. But how did we get here? To understand that, we go back to October 20th, 1943, to Liverpool still healing from bombs and war. Chris Lawler was born into a tough area. Really tough. You had to stand on your feet, have your own mind, stand up for yourself. That is what he said about it. There were no academies or development centres. There was just football. Football was the only thing you had. Everybody played football 24/7. On streets, on bomb sites, anywhere there was a ball. That was where Lawler learned to read the game, to see space, to understand movement. He learned it the hard way, the Liverpool way. By the time Bill Shankly arrived in 1959, young Chris Lawler was ready. Shankly built a philosophy on collective spirit. Every player had a role, no stars, just a team that moved as one. Lawler was perfect for that system, a local lad who understood what it meant to fight for something bigger. Bob Paisley, Shankly's chief trainer, saw something special. He looked at Lawler and said, "You belong on the right back." It was a masterstroke. Getting to the first team was not simple. Lawler had to push. At times, he asked for a transfer, frustrated by lack of chances. The club said no. They saw something worth waiting for. That shows something the Silent Knight nickname often hides. Chris Lawler had ambition. He fought for his place. Once he had it, he would change the full-back position forever. Between 1960 and 1975, Chris Lawler played 549 matches for Liverpool and scored 61 goals. A right-back, 61 goals. But Lawler was not a set-piece man. His goals came from open play. He had a technique years ahead of its time. They called it ghosting. He would wait, watch, calculate. Then, when space opened up, he would slip into the box like a shadow. Late runs, intelligent positioning, a calm finish. The breakdown reveals the story. In the league, 406 matches and 41 goals. In the FA Cup, 47 matches and 4 goals. In the League Cup, 27 matches and 5 goals. In European competitions, 66 matches and 11 goals. That European record is key. He was more dangerous in Europe than the domestic league. This suggests his style worked against continental defences that used zonal marking. None of this happened in isolation. Lawler had brilliant teammates who understood him. Ian Callaghan on the wing, Tommy Smith in defence. Lawler explained it himself. If I went forward, Ian Callaghan would drop back or Tommy Smith would cover. We all knew each other. Not like today when it is a different team every week. We had a system. That was the genius of Shankly's Liverpool. Players who moved together, who understood their roles without needing to shout. Smith would drop deeper, Callaghan would fall back, Lawler could push forward. It was total football before anyone called it that. What made Lawler remarkable was his durability. From October 2nd, 1965 to April 24th, 1971, Chris Lawler played 316 consecutive games, 316 matches without missing one. No substitutes for much of that streak. Limited medical support, muddy pitches, rough, physical football. The play-through pain culture was real. Lawler played through minor tears, strains, things that would sideline modern players for weeks. He carried injuries we will never know about. He played through pain and never complained. The silent night just turned up. He just played. That durability was celebrated as heroism, but it was also laying groundwork for what came later. All that accumulated trauma, all those miles on damaged tissue, it was writing a debt his body would have to pay. By November 1973, that bill was coming due. At Loftus Road against Queen's Park Rangers, Chris Lawler suffered a severe cartilage injury. The era matters. In 1973, a cartilage operation was brutal. Surgery often meant removal, not repair. There was no sophisticated keyhole surgery, no advanced rehabilitation. Bob Paisley was the trainer that day. He applied a chemical bandage to reduce swelling. That was the treatment. Lawler recovered, or seemed to, but something had broken that could not be fixed properly with 1970s medicine. I was never quite the same player afterwards, he said later. His kneecap kept giving way. The knee was unstable. The structure was damaged beyond what medicine could restore. A year later came the 1974 FA Cup final against Newcastle. Shankly named Chris Lawler as the 12th man. It was a touch of sentiment. Lawler had played only one match in the previous 5 months, but Shankly named him anyway, a gesture of gratitude. It was beautiful. It was also the beginning of the end. That summer, everything changed. Shankly resigned. Bob Paisley took over. Paisley was not romantic. He was pragmatic. In late 1974, Paisley signed Phil Neal from Northampton Town. Neal was young, fit, durable. He would become the most decorated player in the club's history. Lawler disappeared almost overnight. In the season and a half after Paisley took charge, Lawler played only 17 matches. The man who had played 316 consecutive games was now a substitute, barely used, fading fast. There was another shift too, less obvious but more cutting. The dressing room was changing. New voices were rising, louder voices. Phil Thompson was one. Thompson was described as more vociferous, more commanding, the opposite of the silent night. Lawler's quiet professionalism, which had worked for a decade, was now seen by some as a lack of forcefulness. Times were changing. The game was becoming louder, and the silent night did not know how to shout. In October 1975, Chris Lawler left Liverpool. It was the end of an era. That same year, something far more devastating happened. Chris and his wife, Geraldine, lost their eldest child, Christelle Rose. A parent losing a child is the deepest pain any human can know. For Lawler, this came as his career collapsed. His identity was being stripped away. His family was being broken by grief. He was processing this in a culture that did not allow men to speak about pain. The silent night kept silent. He had to. That was what men did then. Leaving Anfield, Lawler became a journeyman. He joined Portsmouth under Ian St. John. In 1976, he went on loan to the Miami Toros in the North American Soccer League. He came back and played for Stockport County, then non-league Bangor City. The descent from European Cup football showed harsh reality. There was no comfortable retirement. There was no pension cushion. Lawler had to keep playing on damaged legs to earn money. Eventually, Lawler returned to Liverpool as a reserve team coach. It seemed like a pathway to dignity, to being part of the club as an elder statesman. But in 1986, that too ended. He was acrimoniously released. The details remained guarded, kept private by a man who never spoke out of turn. But Phil Thompson replaced him, the same man who symbolised the shift away from the Silent Night era. Lawler retreated. He scouted occasionally, but largely disappeared. He kept a low profile. He was no longer visible. For decades, Chris Lawler lived quietly. He was a legend, yes, but a legend forgotten in the present tense. He was history. And then, in 2021, the body he had given to football demanded payment. The physical debt came due. By then, the wealth gap between modern players and the golden generation had become obscene. Modern players earned in a week what Lawler earned in a decade. Modern players had medical insurance. Modern players had pensions. Modern players had access to any surgeon instantly. Lawler had to wait a year on an NHS list and ask for charity. But the Lawler case was not unique. It was a symptom of something bigger. For years, critics like John Giles had pointed out the failure of the Professional Footballers Association, the PFA. Giles was harsh and direct. The PFA has camouflaged the mistreatment of former players, he said. A load of players from my generation fell on bad times. They have heart attacks, cancer, bad hips, bad knees, and they have not been looked after. That was not the opinion of an angry outsider. That was the judgment of one of football's greatest players. The PFA had amassed money and built reserves, but had not used those resources to care for the men who built the game. The story becomes more complicated when you look at governance. Gordon Taylor was the PFA chief executive for decades. Allegations emerged. Gambling debts, a salary criticised as too high while ex-players struggled. The juxtaposition was stark. The head of the union supposed to protect footballers faced his own scandals, while men like Chris Lawler could not afford basic medical care. It was a damning indictment. Somewhere along the way, the brotherhood had been replaced by bureaucracy and empty promises. When Lawler's GoFundMe went public, it shone a light on all of this. Suddenly, everyone could see the gap. They could see the disparity between the billions flowing through football and the man who had helped build the Liverpool brand, unable to afford to walk without screaming. The fans responded immediately. The spirit of Shankly stepped in within hours, but it was the anonymous former player that completed the story. He remembered. In the silence, he remembered. He stepped forward and said, "I will do this. I will make sure you walk again." And Chris Lawler did walk again, but that walk came at a cost to his dignity that should never have been necessary. A legend should not have to beg. A legend should not have to rely on the charity of a man who had to stay silent about his own generosity. A legend should have been looked after by the system he had helped build. That is the real story. That is the truth that needed revealing. Because on the pitch, Chris Lawler was a phenomenon. A right-back who scored like a striker. A defender who ghosted into the box. A man who played 316 games without missing one. Who scored 61 goals from open play in an era when that was impossible. Who was ahead of his time tactically, moving into space before zones were even a concept. Who was dignified, quiet, never seeking attention, never demanding anything. He was the silent knight. But that silence off the pitch meant something different. It meant that when he suffered alone. When he faced tragedy, he endured in quiet. When he was replaced, he did not fight back. When he was released, he accepted it. When he struggled with pain and money, he did not tell anyone until he had no choice. That was the cost of being the silent knight in a game that became increasingly loud and increasingly greedy. The game forgot him. The union did not protect him. The modern world did not value what he had given. What Chris Lawler deserves to be remembered for is not just what he did on the pitch, though that was extraordinary. He deserves to be remembered for his dignity off it. He deserves to be remembered for carrying loss, carrying pain, carrying rejection, and never becoming bitter. He deserves to be remembered for what he overcame. And football deserves to be remembered for how it forgot him. His story is a mirror. It shows what a sport values and what it does not. It shows the gap between the glory days and the commercial age. It shows that protecting your own, looking after your brothers, matters more than any trophy. Chris Lawler is a symbol of resilience, loyalty, and the cost of giving everything to a game. He is also a symbol of what is wrong in modern football. Like this video. Subscribe. Tell your friends about this story. Comment your favourite Chris Lawler moment, because legends like him deserve to be remembered, and football deserves to remember what it owes.